Okay, so tonight we're going to actually go over a new testing framework called Protractor that is going to allow you to create end-to-end tests for your AngularJS applications. Now, it's not just for Angular, but it was created specifically with Angular in mind. And as we get into it, you'll see some of the things that it takes advantage of and provides you for some of Angular's binding and stuff. So basically, it's a AngularJS end-to-end testing framework. It was introduced when the AngularJS team had their 1.2 and beyond presentation about 2-3 months ago. And they were talking about that they wanted to be a little bit more mainstream with their testing because there was a lot of things that the existing end-to-end test framework you couldn't do. You actually... And so they wanted to basically kind of break out of that, and they wanted a new testing framework to go with the 1.2 code stream. So it will, over time, will replace the end-to-end testing framework that's actually included the NG scenario stuff. I don't know if anybody's used that yet. And it will take over. So what's different about it? First of all, it's built on WebDriver and Selenium. I don't know how many people have ever used Selenium before to drive web test or anything. And WebDriver.js is actually a JavaScript wrapper for the Selenium server that it runs under Node.js. And it has pretty much the same features if you've ever used a WebDriver or any of the C# or Python drivers that they have for Selenium. It's full featured. It's a new syntax from the old way that you wrote your Angular apps as far as how you find elements and stuff like that. And I've actually got a list of what you used to do and what you have to do today. We'll get to that. The nice thing is it allows you to run tests against remote servers. And you couldn't do that before with the end-to-end test framework. What ended up happening is you had to actually take your test files and load them up on the server and then actually go someplace and then execute it. And then it would basically run that server against it. So it was basically a single source type of thing. With this, I can target my development site, I can target my staging or my production, just by changing one parameter, and I don't have to worry about having those files there. So it keeps you from, kind of limits the denial of service attack should somebody find your unit, your end-to-end test, and all of a sudden start running them on you, during the middle of business. You can also take advantage of Selenium Grid, so you can actually say I need 100 virtual browsers or 100 browsers to run these tests. So you could kind of do a load test that route. You can also specify what OS you want to use, whether you want to use Mac or Linux or Windows. If you want to run Firefox or Chrome or Safari or IE or Android or iOS. So they've got drivers for everything except for, I think, Windows Phone. And I think somebody's actually working on a Windows Phone driver. The other thing is you can take advantage of Sauce Labs. I don't know if anybody have ever used Sauce Labs to do any of their testing, but it's nice in the fact that you can basically with your user ID and an API key, and I'll actually show you an example a little bit later on, that it will actually kick off a task on their servers, and then basically load up X amount of clients and run your test against it, and then give you reports back. And it also records everything that happens on it. It has its own runner. So with the old E2E test framework, you used Karma to run it. This actually, Protractor is actually the runner. Actually handles the runner for you. And then you can either use Jasmine or Mocha to write your test suite. So I don't know how many people have used Jasmine before to write unit test or Mocha. They're pretty similar. They're all they're considered behavioral-driven development test suites. So you start off with you describe your suite or whatever feature you're going to do, and then it normally has like a before each or after each condition, and then it will say it, and you would normally have like a statement. It should not allow you to log in if your password's incorrect, and then you have all your code in there. So And we'll kind of go through it and you'll see some of it. But this gives you a little bit more flexibility. Now, there's also somebody else who's working on integrating Cucumber.js with Protractor as well that I saw. He had something pop up in the issues log about a week ago that he's trying to get it to work with it. So really anything that can load up Protractor and drive it, you can use it. So here's how you install Protractor, and now this is it's very easy. You use the Node Package Manager. So you need to have Node on your system, whether you're running Mac or Linux or Windows. The only thing you have to worry about with Windows is you got to make sure it's in the path. So when you open up a DOS box or command prompt, that it'll know where to find Node. But you just do npm install Protractor. That'll install it locally into your project directory. You can also do a -G, and it'll install it globally for you. People have actually been having problems running it from global, and I think it was one of the issues out there. They may have already resolved it, but I know that I find it much easier to put it in my local project with all the rest of the Node modules that I might be using. And then if you're going to run this, if you don't have a Selenium server that you're going to use to drive your test from, you can use the standalone server. And basically, this is the command line for the standalone server, node modules, protractor bin, and then install Selenium standalone. And if you do that from Windows, you got to put node space in front of that, so that node will actually pick it up and launch it. You don't need to have the standalone server installed if you've got a server in your network that you're using, or you got a grid that you're going to, or if you're going to use Sauce Labs. And the core to everything on this is the configuration file. What they suggest you do is you copy the configuration file from Node Modules Protractor. There's a conf.js, copy it to wherever you're going to run it from, and then modify it. But there's 5 things you need to do. You need to look at when you're modifying that configuration file so that you get everything set up. First is your Selenium server configuration. The second is where are your test files going to be located at. Third, the browser capabilities that you need, like whether you need Firefox or you want iOS or something. And then the base URL for your file. So one of the best practices is that everything in your test files are all relative paths. And then you use this base URL so that you only change it one place. So like you could have a production configuration, a test configuration, a dev configuration. And then the Jasmine node configuration. And that's basically, it uses Jasmine Mini for Node. And so this basically goes through and says, do I want it to be verbose or whatever? And we'll kind of go through the pieces. So for the Selenium configuration, there's 3 ways you can specify, what server to use. You can use the server jar and the port, and that basically will then launch. It'll take Java, launch the Selenium server and on a particular port. If you have a Selenium server that's already in your network, you can just provide the URL or the address to it. Or if you're going to use Sauce Labs, you provide your Sauce user and your API key. And the Sauce user and API key will override everything else. So and the other thing I found out is that the documentation says you only need to provide the server the jar path, but unless you specify a port, it will go find some random port, and it has a hard time mixing it up. So I always put the Selenium port in there as well to make sure that you don't run into issues. So you know a well-known port. So the other thing from Selenium point of view is the arguments that you want to pass to Selenium server. There's special arguments that you can pass to it. If you want to actually find out more about Selenium, I would suggest you look up Selenium HQ, and I've got that on the back. But it is a large project that's supported by tons of people around the world. The path to your drivers, in the case the default configuration, it uses Chrome driver, and when you actually install the standalone server, it will download the Chrome driver for you, so you provide a path of where it's at. And then the capabilities of what browser information you need, the size of the screen, stuff like that. And this link here will actually take you to a nice big page full of well-detailed information about the different browser capabilities that you can specify. So there's other configuration stuff, the spec files, where they're at, an array of file patterns that you're going to point to say, here's all my test. And you can use glob patterns. I don't know if anybody's ever used glob patterns where you'll do like specs/*/*.js or something, and it'll walk all the subdirectories and find every JS file and then load that up and run it. The base URL, like I said, wherever you're pointed to, like in a lot what we're going to do here and some of the stuff I'm going to show you during the demo, will be, since it's running a grunt task, it loads up a server on port 9000 to localhost. So we'll set the base URL to localhost 9000, and that way everything will be relative from there. And then your Jasmine node options. If you want to do something on complete, like you want to destroy a database or copy files places, you can use an onComplete function. You provide a function for it to call. Whether you want verbose output while it's running the test and on errors, whether you want it to show colors. So what it'll do is it'll show passing scenarios in green and failing scenarios in red. And then whether you want a stack trace when it fails so that you can figure out where it failed at. And we'll see some of those, because some of my tests actually fail because of some of the stuff I'm actually trying to do. This is an example of the basic test structure, and if you're familiar with Jasmine, it'll look pretty similar except for a couple of extra lines in here. The very first thing that you need to do is actually define a required JavaScript class called util that it loads up, that it uses. You don't actually have to require Protractor or Jasmine, the Jasmine WebDriver or anything like that. It's by default, Protractor will actually load all that up for you. And then by default, everybody calls it PTOR as what's going to be your driver object that's going to basically drive your test. You could call it anything you want. You could call it driver. You could call it client. All the examples that you'll see everybody doing, they're using PTOR, short for Protractor. And then every time we want to use it, at the beginning of our functions, we want to call protractor.getInstance. And that's going to bring you back the actual instance of the Protractor that's actually been loaded up. And then, like in this case here, we've got a before each method that it's going to basically take us to the home page every time before every test starts. And then the next thing is that when we say it should do something, it's going to basically go find an element by class name and then click on it and then expect the URL to change to be something else. This is just a quick sample. The other thing that's a little bit different than normal Jasmine is you'll see this comma 10,000 here on the end of the it method. Because Jasmine node actually is asynchronous in nature. By default, it does a 5-second timeout. So if you have any test that's going to last over 5 seconds or whatever, it will automatically fail when it hits the 5-second point. So this comma 10,000 can be used to actually overwrite and set per test whatever you want your timeout to be. So if you got one long running test that's going to take 20 seconds because it's going out to the server and packaging up a bunch of files and creating you a generic image, then you can basically extend it out. I tried something today where I was running through and having it creating like 35 different orders all at once and set it up to, I think, 900 seconds to get it to pass so it wouldn't time itself out. So one of the things that a lot of people need to do is you need to find elements on the web page, right? And they're called locators. And there's two ways that we could actually locate elements that we might want to click on or interrogate and look at. The first one is find element. And then you're going to specify a locator. In the case of Protractor, it's protractor.by, and then it's going to be something like CSS, ID. So it'll be like Protractor by XPath. And I'll get into those in a little bit more detail. Or if you want to get an array of, let's say that you've got a linked, like an unordered list that is like a navigation array. and you want to pull all those back, and you want to see if certain things are displayed or not in the menu, you can use ptor dot or find elements, and then it will return you back an array of web elements that you can then interrogate and look at. And again, find element returns a single element, and then find elements returns an array of elements. Now, all these are asynchronous in nature, so you can also, on the end of any of the questions, and as we get in here, you'll see we'll do .click or something on it, and what find element will do, or find elements will do, is it'll return back a promise, and when it actually, the page renders and it gets to that, then it will then basically fulfill that promise, and then you can chain that together to do different things. If it can't find it, though, it will throw an exception, and that'll basically kill that test at that point. And what it'll do is, if you have, let's say, 20 tests in one spec file and 15 tests in another, and the second test in the first spec file fails, then it'll move to the next test. It will actually walk through all the tests until they either all succeed or one in each fails. But as soon as it fails once, then it'll stop with that spec file.
What's the timeout on finding elements?
It's actually you can actually override it with the normal Selenium config, but by default it's 5 seconds is the way they've got it set up for everything. But what you can do is you can set implicit and explicit wait times to override that, like you would with WebDriver. I don't have any examples of that, but I've got 2 books that are actually, I found good reference material to get up to speed on it. That kind of helped me along to get past it, because there's very little. There's maybe about 4 or 5 web pages on WebDriver.js and then the source code. But everything else is around the normal web drivers, whether you're using Ruby or Java or C#. So these are the different locators, and these are the actual standard ones that you would find with the WebDriver.js. So if you were just using WebDriver.js by itself, you would have by class name, by CSS, and that would use like a normal CSS selector. So if you're familiar with CSS selectors or jQuery, the CSS selectors are a little bit more strict compared to jQuery selectors. You have by ID, and then by name. By link text, you can do full link text or partial link text. By name, by tag name, and then by XPath. And you can provide an XPath. I didn't put an XPath in there. I've got some of those. Sometimes when you really need to get down to, I need the second, the second aref after the third diff in the file. I mean, sometimes it's the only way you can get to it. Yeah. But these are standard. So if you were just using WebDriver.js without Protractor, this is what you'd have available for you to find elements. With Protractor, what they've done is they've actually expanded that and provided things that are AngularJS oriented. So the first thing is by binding. So you can take anything that you're doing like an ng bind to, or a model, and you can say, okay, I want to find this by this binding, and you can use the double mustache binding, or you can use whatever you're using in an ng model. You can do it by a select and use the ng model off the select, or a selected option, by an input, and again, most of these are all by the binding values that they're using. And then by a repeater, and this is something new that is different than what they did with the end-to-end stuff, is that you actually provide the repeater, what you would normally put after the ng repeat, cat and cats, or so that's actually how they specify it. And then you can also say, I want a particular row and column. You can go all the way down to the column in a row. If you do by row, you actually get back the entire row of data, all the inner text for the row. If you pick it to a particular column, you can either do 0 through whatever X number of columns that are there, or you can also do it by binding like it shows here.
How it supports the binding clauses? Does it look? I know it's.
He's actually so if you actually look at the Protractor.js that's actually out there on GitHub, they actually have what they call a client-side library that actually does all the scraping and looks for like an ng-bind or an ng repeat and then tries to map that and say, okay, here's the element that you're looking for, and then it gives you back the reference to the element based on that. So there's a CLI.js that does most of that, and then the Protractor JS is the other part of it that actually wraps the WebDriver in the Protractor object and gives it basically does all the passing or calling the Angular based stuff. There's other things that it provides, like wait for Angular, which actually give you the ability to wait for Angular to finish and wait for the page to render and everything like that. So let's say that you're going to click on something that you know is going to basically change the view and all that, and it's going to take a little while to set up because it's going to wait for a resolve on a controller. So you can sit there and say, okay, protractor dot wait for Angular, and then once Angular's done and it's went through and finally rendered the DOM and everything's back active, then it'll continue. So which is kind of nice. Well, so once you get a web element, you want to do something with it, right? So these are all the methods that you can basically deal with the web element. You can clear it. So if it's a text entry field, you can clear it out. You can click on it. You can get an attribute, and you provide the name of the attribute, and it'll give you the text back for it. You can get CSS values. So like if you want to interrogate whether the display is none or block or something like that. You can get its location. You can also get its size and then what tag it's embedded in. If you use a different selector and you don't know, was that actually a H2 tag that I was supposed to get or not? These are some more. You can actually get the text, so it'll get you back the. Now this is important because, like it says, get the visible text. If it's hidden, it will return you back nothing. Same way with click. If there's an element on the page and it's hidden, it will return back the element to you. But when you go to click on it, it'll throw an exception, say it's not visible, and you can't click on it, which is basically what you would expect, because you would if it was like an option that's only displayed, you wouldn't want somebody just to be able to go click on it even though it's not there. You can query if it's displayed, whether it's enabled, whether it's selected, and then you can also send keys to it. And this is very basic. What I've got here. There are action sequences that you can also set up so that you can actually do drag and drop scenarios. You can do multi-key scenarios where you have to hold down, Control Alt and press a key to as you're clicking on something. So they do provide a lot of that. What I wanted to do is cover the basics and get you up and started. So let me go back here. So let's say we want to migrate some of our existing test scripts. Now, what I have on the left-hand side is what you would normally have typed in using the old E2E scenario driver, ng scenario. And then on the right-hand side is what you do today with Protractor. So, the first one was like browser.navigate to. And, now we do just, protractor.get in your URL. And again, if you provide a base URL in your configuration, it will basically prepend that onto it if it's relative, but if it's a full path, it'll ignore it and use the full path that you provide to it. Browser.location.url, they don't actually have like a path. It's because it is dealing with the browser in a more holistic way. The only thing you can really do is like get current URL, which is going to give you back the full URL, and then you're going to have to look for does it contain something that I'm looking for? If you want to make sure it went to one of your views based on the route engine. Normally we could do like binding.name to actually bring back the value of a binding. In our case, we're going to do find element, protractor by binding, and then provide the binding name, and then .get text, and then give you the text back. Input.enter, we name it used to be input and then the model value, and then .enter, whatever you want to send. We can do protractor by input, the model value, and then .send keys. And if you wanted to do a check, like you wanted to check a box, they don't really have a check method anymore. You go find it by the model and then click on it. If it was a checkbox or a radio button. And then with selects, you can't handle it like we did with the old E2E, where you could say, here's the binding, and I want you to select this value out of your data, or I want you to select these multiple values out of your data. You actually have to go through and click on stuff, and I'll show you an example of that on the next one. And then if you want to get the value of a text field, you use find by input with the binding, and then .get text. And then for repeater, and you want to get a count in that, what you're going to do is ptor.find elements, and then by repeater, and then use length of that, because it's going to return you back in a length of elements, or the length of the array. If you wanted to get a row out of a particular repeater, we used to just say, here's my selector for my repeater, give me the row back and the index. What we're going to do now is going to be find element by repeater, and then row.index. So it's pretty similar. The big thing is that they're using this find element syntax around stuff, which is a little bit different than the old stuff. And then if we wanted to get a column, we do repeater with our selector, and then column, and then the binding that we want. In our case, we do the same thing, find element by repeater, and then the row and the column that we want by binding. The only thing that I know, and I got a double period in there, but it's one period for column, is that I wonder how come they didn't do like a row by binding. I guess because rows don't really bind, don't really have a binding to them. And then if you want to do a select, and you want to pick one item in a select box, what you actually have to do is you actually have to click on the select box to open it up, and then find the element by, like a CSS selector, like I have here, option with value equals something, and then click on that to actually do the select. And then if you want to do a multi-select, you do the same thing. You click on your select, and then you go and you find each one of the elements and click on them, so that you do your multi-select. You can also do this with an action sequence, which is probably a little bit better. If you're required, you got to hold down the shift key while you're clicking on stuff. Then you would basically wind this all up into an action sequence. And then if you want to just get an element, which we kind of talked about, to do stuff with element, because a lot of times we would just say, get me this element, and then I want to get the text or get the attribute from it, which we already covered. So I guess now we're going to play with some code. So let me switch things around here. And so I don't know how many people have been to my previous presentations, but I've been playing around with I'm an avid home brewer, and so I've been playing around with a recipe site that I can use anywhere. And it seems like I'm always so busy, I've only got past a couple things, but this is going to be our test site. And you can actually pull up items and stick, the additives or adjuncts are things you can add to your beer to give it flavor, or yeast nutrients and stuff like that. It's about the only thing I have there. But if I come in here and I log in, well, I guess he didn't like that. I wonder if I broke it. No, I must have broke it. Will you go away? Not now. I guess I did break it. We'll have to go fix it. Yep. Broke something. Or I can go register too as well. Probably something I was playing with last night. But what we're going to do is I'm going to basically use this as a basis to write a bunch of end-to-end tests that we can play with. So we'll go ahead and we'll minimize this down, and I'll bring up my solution here. So I don't know how many people have actually used the Yeoman Angular generator, but this is kind of the structure it gives you when you get started out. So you get you get an app folder, you get your node modules, and then it gives you a test folder. And then once you install the Selenium standalone server, you'll get a Selenium folder. But in your node modules, you get a bunch of grunt task and karma task, and then we get Protractor and the Selenium WebDriver. And then as you create something, what it does is as you create a controller or a view, you basically under scripts controllers, you'll see we have our controllers here, which are actual controllers for our for the pages that we're displaying. It also echoes and creates a spec file or a unit test file here. So what I did was I just since end-to-end test scenarios they're basically a scenario by itself, I just created a scenario folder, and we're just going to basically put our scenarios in here. So this is my first one of the very first ones we have here, and hopefully everybody can see this. But we're going to start out, and we're going to basically go through the adjunct list, which is basically it goes out and it hits a database on the Mongo Labs website and pulls back a list of about 150 items, and then we're going to click through it, and when we hit the next button, we expect the item to change, the item that's active to change. You can click first, last, type of things like that. So our first thing is we're going to basically up here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to define util in here so that we have the stuff that Protractor needs. And then we'll go ahead and we'll describe our feature adjunct list. And then we'll define the Protractor object that we're going to use throughout each one of our tests. And then instead of doing this over and over and over in every test, I'm going to use a before each and say, okay, give me an instance of the Protractor WebDriver, and then go to the adjunct list. And then that's where our test is going to start out. So if you think about it, the normal with your testing is you arrange, you act, and you assert, right? So you can use the before eaches to do your arrange. Get everything set up to where you're ready to start your test. And then use each one of your it scenarios to actually do your action and your assertion. So what we're going to do is it should show a list of adjuncts. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go out there, and then we're going to go find everything that has a row, because I'm doing it as a table. And we're going to make sure that we at least get 11 rows back, because that's what I'm displaying. Now the reason I'm doing this instead of a repeater, because I found out that apparently there are some limitations to the repeater, and when I tried to pull back the repeater for the thing, it kept blowing up because I was exceeding the size of the repeater. So even though I'm actually doing a start from and a limit to, and I'm limiting it to 10, apparently the way it is now, it blows chunks, and I'm still waiting to find out what I'm doing wrong or how I'm calling it wrong. So this was another way for me to find it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, give me all the tags that are a table row, and then when you find all those, then I want that array of rows back, and then I'm going to make sure that the length is 11, because that's what I'm going to display. And even though I'm showing 10, there is one more table row in there, which is your table head. So, and then I'm going to basically, if it doesn't complete in 10 seconds, I'm going to time it out. Now, the next one is should page to the next page when the next button is clicked. So what I'm going to do again is we get the instance to Protractor, and then I'm going to get the class for the active button, which is the third button over, and we're using by XPath because this is actually using a Bootstrap pagination class. So I've got a directive in there that says pagination using UI Bootstrap, which then turns into a whole bunch of ULs and LIs. So I had to basically go in and use XPath to go find that because it's dynamically created. So then I wanted to get the attribute on that, and then we're going to hang on to that because it actually has active in it if it's the active attribute. Then I'm going to go find the next button by the partial link text and click on it. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to grab that same element and grab the class again and make sure that they're not equal to each other, because what should happen is it should have changed from active to non-active. So I know that my next button actually worked. Actually, I know that my pagination displayed it properly. I don't know if the data changed. To assert it, you would want to check all the data as well. And then if you clicked on a page, like if I clicked on page number 5, I'd expect the page to change. So this does basically the same thing. We get our instance, we find the original class of the one I'm going to click on, which is the fifth list item. And then I'm going to actually find that same guy and click on him, and then grab the class again, and I expect them not to be the same. I expect it to now have active on it. So I could query it for active, but since it's not going to be the same when you click on it, I figured that was a good enough test as well. So that's the adjunct one. Let's go back over here. We've got... so now here's another one, and this is a logged in scenario versus a logged out scenario, the home page. So in this case here, we're going to basically describe home page, logged in, and then what we're going to do before each test is we're going to walk through and log in to the site. And then basically what we're looking at is when you're logged in, you actually see different text. You see my calendar, my recipes, my inventory. Whereas if you're logged out, you see the top rated recipes, the top contributors, and what's fermenting, which is what everybody's got brewing or whatever. Because I was actually going to make this kind of a social sharing site. So in this case here, and these are all pretty much repeats, what we're doing is we're basically saying, give me all the H2 tags, because I decided that I don't need to go find out or put IDs or names on any of these tags, so that they're all created dynamically. So I have to go get all the H2 tags and then go through them and find which one it should be. And I know that if I count them out, this one should be number 6 and this one should be number 8 or 9 or whatever. So I basically header 1. So I'm going to basically make sure I've got 6 different headers. Now and then I'm going to get header number 1, get its text to make sure it says my recipe, and then the other thing I'm going to make sure, because these are just using ng shows to show them and hide them, which means they're still there on the page. I also want to check to make sure that it actually is displayed. So I'm interrogating that web element to say, are you displayed? And it will return back true or false. So we basically can use that. The other thing you can use is you could actually say ptor.isElementPresent and use a locator to find an element. But that only tells you if it's present on the page. You still then have to go interrogate, is it actually visible or not? Is it selectable or not? Is it enabled or not?
So that one sounds useful in the fact it's going to give you a Boolean answer that you can then act on for the remainder of the test, whereas most of the time WebDriver will try and throw exceptions.
Yes.
When it doesn't work.
Well, and that's one of the things that I've actually fought with is we have conditions on the online ordering site that if you have an order in progress and you start another order, it pops up an alert, do you want to cancel this existing order? Well, when you're trying to test around that, it becomes very painful, because what you have to do, as soon as you start your order, you have to go searching to say, is this element present on the page? Well, it's present on the page, but then I've got to go find out, is it actually displayed? And so a lot of times I'll have that when I start out a sequence, I'll go start any order over, and then I'll log the guy out. And so I've got to look for certain things. I do that always in a before each, but it can, in line, it can become problemsome, and you can fight with it quite a bit. But the other two tests here, basically, they're doing the same thing. But the second one's looking for my calendar and whether it's displayed, and the other one, my inventory. Now, if I go over here and we get the logged out scenario, you'll see it looks exactly the same as the logged in, but I'm not logging in the user at the beginning and the before each. I'm just basically taking and going to the home page. And then I've got an extra test in here to make sure that there's nobody logged in. And so what I'm doing is I'm using the by binding and saying, give me the current brewer first name and this text welcome. And then I get the text, and then once I've gotten the text, I expect it to be blank, because that tells me that there's nobody logged in. And then the next one is similar to all the rest of them. Go get me all the H2 tags, and now I'm looking for like highest rated recipes and making sure that it's actually displayed. Highest contributors, and then what's fermenting. So, and what you'll find out, and one of the things I haven't got into here, because again, this is the tip of the iceberg, but you can start building page models. So if you're working on let's say your home page, and there's certain things that you're always going to be going after, then you can build, a JavaScript object that is going to basically get me back this, get me back that, so that you wrap this stuff into a class or encapsulated class that you use. And,
You're looking at a lot of H2s and finding the appropriate position and all that. Coming at this from end-to-end testing, does this make you want to go ahead and be more specific about your IDs and that? Working that way?
well, it can be, especially when you're so when. Because we started this off when I started doing the end-to-end test, I would go add IDs or I would add names to stuff. But to have properly formatted HTML, there's certain things that can't have an ID according to HTML validators. So then you're left either using names or CSS selectors. I think Paul's idea of learn CSS selectors, and you'll overcome 99% of what you don't have if you don't have an ID. And that's probably the best way to look at it. Because a lot of what designers are doing nowadays, and I noticed this when we worked with this design team out of Michigan, is they are putting classes in like you would normally put names or IDs in. And so they will have a class that says, this is my button, or this is my logout button, or this is this form. So they've kind of done that, and they've thought about it. I don't think they thought it all the way through, because there was places where all we had was the same matching, CSS class .red button. But there was other ways to go around it, and that's where the locators, the multitude of locators, like if you're looking for a link, and it's the only link on there that says place order on the page, use by link text. Don't try to find it by ID. Don't try to find it by name or class. If it doesn't have a link to it, which a lot of Ahrefs or Hrefs and that don't have, use link text. It'll be much easier for you. And I think the only other one is, we'll look at the register one as well, but this is the menu one, which is the drop down menus, and it should return the home page when I click on the brand. It should return to the home page when I actually click on the home link. And again, here I am, I'm cheating and I'm using XPath. But I mean, these all follow a same thing. We go find an element and we either click on it, and then once we've clicked on it, we say, okay, give me a URL, and I expect it to have to contain this, or get the title, and I expect the title to say something. That's one way to make sure that you've actually changed a page. In here, it should show a personal menu when the user's logged in. So again, we go find, here we're using by input. So we're using the model login.username. We're sending the keys, and then we're clicking. And then here I'm using a CSS selector because my login button didn't have an ID. So I'm using basically an attribute selector, button with the attribute of ngClick that begins with login. So that's another way where you can use a CSS selector that'll get you that combination of stuff that you want. And it's probably much better than using the XPath that I have here to see if I've got my stuff menu. But you guys, any questions about the structure of it?
I have one question in terms of how do you reuse steps? Example, most often when you're testing some of the admin functionality, example, like say we were a loan company and we had to test past due accounts. So they have to log in, and what they see is going to be different when it's past due 3 days versus past due 30 days. So how do you reuse like
So that's actually where you start creating JavaScript objects or classes that you're going to use and redo stuff. And so what you're going to do is you're going to pass in the protractor object to it, and it might be login, or it might be, and there's this concept out there, they talk about page objects. So when you're on like the past due accounts page, you may have all these methods that says find, the 5-day past due thing, or find the 30-day, is 30-day, is 5-day past due. And that would have the code in there so that you could reuse it over and over and over.
The only problem I see with that is you want to pass in dynamic data to kind of that step way down there, so you need like a context. So I've seen it solved differently in different frameworks, but I was just wondering how this happens.
Yeah, there's several different ways to do it, and so keeping dynamic context. One of the things I was trying to do today was actually I had an array of data that was basically, here's the location I want to create the order, here's the sandwich I want to place, and here's the user I want to log in, and if it was a delivery order, here's the user's address that I want to place the order from. So that I could do different scenarios. And so what my test consisted of was a for loop that basically ran a bunch of protractor steps. Start here, do this, do this, do this. So you can do that as well. You see that a lot more with Cucumber style stuff, where you'll build an array of here's my test data, and then what it'll do is it'll pass an object in to that, and then you run that over and over and over. So you can do that that way as well.
Yeah, if you're using MS Test, you can feed it a data source and give it an Excel file.
Yeah. If you've ever used SpecFlow or in .NET, they do that a lot. And so you can feed it a bunch of different data. And you can do something similar to that with this. What you have to do, though, is you actually have to build up your data at the beginning, and then you're going to access it in your it statement. You won't pass it into it. You can. But normally what you're going to do that. I had another thing where I actually executed the same it statement in a for loop. And what it did outside the it statement is it would increment an ID. And then that it statement would then use that same ID, but it was just incremented one after the other, because that was the only way you could use the old end-to-end scenario runner to actually do that. With this, you're a little bit more flexible, and you can actually put a for loop inside there and then make all your calls and have your context that route.
Another thing that I see is, kind of going back to this, you mentioned something about end-to-end test, is, see, if I have this in C#, I can then check my database. I can check that something got added to the MSQ. I can check, and that would be the full end-to-end test. Here I only see the results.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But yeah, if it's RESTful services, okay.
Yeah, so yeah, if you want to see how did it affect the back end, the best way to do that is like Paul said, is create a RESTful service and say, okay, now what was the results of what I just did? Sometimes my results, though, are coming out on a printer at a store, or it shows up on a POS system, or I get an email. And those are where you actually, sometimes your end-to-end tests are going to result in manual checks that you have to do. But a lot of the things, like if I'm not logged in, should I be able to get to the favorites tab or not? That's pretty easy to test. So if you think about, sometimes your testing can be multiple phases. As a matter of fact, what we do is on our to test the web API on our backend, we have a set of tests that are JMeter tests that just basically run against that, and all they're doing is they're just sending JSON requests and do I get data back? That's another way to test it as well. But this works really good for doing most of your, like you say, results driven and part of it. And then I think the last one of these I was going to actually go through was the register scenario. And this one is pretty much, it's kind of a repeat of the same thing. The first thing we do is we check to see, we get to the register page. So in the before each, we're basically getting an instance and we're saying go to the register page. And then then for each test, I'm going to basically go through and start out with something like the first one. I shouldn't allow submission, and so because the form's empty, it's invalid at this point. So all I'm going to do is go find my register button and make sure that check to see if he is enabled. And on some of these, you have to use like the then clause because they're chaining, because they are promises. It's going to give you back a promise. So you will find that if I do is enabled and I send that to a variable, that it's going to fail. You're going to get a positive value every time because it gives you a promise back, which is truthy. So when you do is that value to be true, it's going to say yes. It's it is truthy. It's a truthy value. So you end up having to do it with the then method. So what we're doing is we're finding our element and we chain is enabled on it, and then we chain a then result to that, and in that function, then we're going to actually look at the value that was returned by is enabled and expect it to be false. So it is a little bit different than what you would think. The WebDriver.js documentation, they get into some really detailed examples of just submitting a Google query. It takes 45 lines of code with some of the stuff that they're trying to do. But they're basically trying to show you how all the promises work and everything. So if you want to see how it works, they've got really great examples, and I've got a link to it at the end of the slides. But and this will also strengthen your asynchronous programming skills, especially around Angular, because Angular has promises everywhere, and so this you get into this frame, and using this promise structure will make your programming a lot easier. And then I get into this big long repeater of it should allow submission when all the required fields are there. And so I fill in all the required fields. And actually, here's something where I'm doing something dynamic. I'm taking the date, so I'm getting the current date and time, and I'm using the value of that to stick it on my user's name. So I'm basically test underscore whatever the time hack is. And you'll see it when we run the test. And I'm also using that so that I have a unique email address. So the nice thing is since I didn't write the code to validate the email, all I'm making sure is it's a valid email. I can get away with that. And then I actually use the time hack for my passwords too. This way I can basically fill up a database with a bunch of test users, and I don't have to worry about ever stomping on a user I used in a previous test. And it's slow enough that I at least get a half a second or a second tick in between, so I never get the same time hack twice. Now, I might run into problems if I were to run this out in parallel across multiple systems, but then I can always put, another clue in front of it that is this is an iOS and this is Chrome or something like that. So there's ways around that. But this is a nice pattern if you've always said, hey, how can I do this? And I can without having to empty the database every time. This is one way around it. And then basically I cheat. And I go through on these here, and I just remove one line and make sure it won't allow me to submit it. So I won't bore you by digging through all that, but it's basically the same as the first one, except now we're just getting the register button, and we're making sure that it's not enabled. But we just go through it over and over and over. And I do that by make sure that the username is missing, then make sure the first name is missing, the last name. So all my required fields. So this is one way to test Angular and make sure that AngularJS actually coded required is right, or some of my other stuff. Like I have a username. You can't have the same username, and I've got a unique username directive. And so this guy here, what he does is I put in a username that I know is there, and I expect that that I'll get a certain thing that'll fail. It won't be valid. Actually, what I need to do is change this and make sure that my error message pops up as well. So that's pretty much just some stuff that we're going to run. Now what I'm going to do, and those of you that saw this earlier, just enjoy it a second time. We'll go ahead and we're going to run these. So I've got my grunt server up and running, and I've got, let me find my other window here. Let's see, here we go. Yeah. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to basically, we're going to go ahead and we're going to run Protractor, and we're going to basically run this test suite now. So, and again, like I said earlier in the presentation, because I've actually installed this using, into my thing, it's Protractor resides in no modules Protractor bin. And so that's where we're going to we have to set the path to it. Now you could create a shell script to do this, or a batch file. To me, it's just as easy to type that up with tab, type a couple of characters in the directory, hit tab. And then we also need to provide our configuration file so it knows where to go find the test, where to start the server and all that. So I'm going to move this guy down here in the corner, and we're going to go ahead and run it. And in a minute here, you'll see Chrome will pop up once it gets the Selenium server started. And then Chrome will pop up, and then we start going through each one of the tests. Now, some of these are going to fail because I broke my login, my password hashing this morning. But you can see how it's going through, setting up the test user, and you can see the time hacks getting put on it. And it just goes and goes and goes.
What's the speed like compared to Karma?
I would say it's a little bit slower, and I think that's because, again, you got to remember that Karma was running all this stuff directly as an iframe, and whereas what we're doing is we're going through a wire-based protocol to the Selenium server, who then is basically pushing buttons and looking at stuff on the web browser. So there is going to be a little bit slower. I think these tests ran in 37 seconds. I had 11 failures because of my password hashing. And actually, you can see here's some of the. Let me make this nice and big. You can see where we've got some of our errors here. Expected register to be back at the home page. Expected blank to contain my stuff because I couldn't log in because I broke stuff. But at the very beginning, you get if you don't have all the verbose, you just get this here where here's my adjunct list. Like all my home page logged in tests failed because we couldn't log in. And then the other ones where it required logged in users, they failed. But you get a red-green type of thing. So you still get that nice, comfortable red-green feeling, My tests are passing if everything's green, or, I've got to go back and do more rework because I got some red. But what I do find is that, and I think this is more part of Jasmine Node, is the way it jumps the stack trace. It's very hard to decipher where your bug is. I mean, you do get the message, I expected this to be that because the expectation failed. But when it can't find something because it can't click on it, you'll just get a message that says element is not visible. And then you have to go back and dig through all your code to find what line of your script failed, which can be kind of painful because it's just one big belch of data there. Okay, now let's see. The other thing is I wanted to show you guys a Sauce Labs test. So I need to go get something out of my Dropbox here. So you can run Protractor in a browser, and therefore you can then set breakpoints in your JavaScript as it's running. But through Protractor by itself there, I haven't heard of anybody doing it, but I'm assuming you could probably use the Node debugger that they've been coming out with, so you could probably set breakpoints that way. I've never tried it, though. Right now, I would say if you want to debug something to find out why it's failing, the best thing to do is to run your test suite inside a browser, and they actually give you instructions on how to do that on the Protractor site. Let's see here. I want to get down in here to Unicorn, and I want to grab... Right.
So, this report that it generates, can it be like HTML formatted that you can put up on a...
Now, I did not actually see any code formatters or anything like that. I know there's some request about it, but I didn't really see it. And again, I'll say I'm relatively new to this. Like I said, it came out about 2 months ago when they started talking about it, and I've basically been working with it for about 4 weeks at the most, and I off and on in between releases and that. I'm sure that there probably are more things you could do, and if you actually go look at the greater Selenium community in that, you're probably going to find more information than you would ever want to know. So let me get back up here. Nope, okay. Where are we at? Okay. Okay, where the hell am I? I'm just going to start another. I'm still a node, no wonder. Okay. Okay, so I just realized I'm going to have to. I've actually got to install Protractor and everything because I just copied this off of one of my machines, and then let's see. What is it? Let's see. E to E scenarios. I don't see it here, so I guess it didn't install it. Well, here, I'm just going to grab one of my scenarios here and the spec file, and we'll copy it someplace where we can and then we'll put it down here. All right. So let me pull this up for you guys. So what I've got is a scenario that is actually going to go against the Jimmy John's website, but we're going to basically use Sauce Labs to actually go run it. So and then to use Sauce Labs, and again, as with all my presentations, the API key changes usually right after the presentation. So it isn't going to help you any if you copy it. But you normally provide Sauce user and Sauce key, and they do have free accounts. You get I think it's like 100 free minutes a month, and to run automated tests and stuff like that. So it's useful. And the scenario we're going to run is basically all I'm going to do is validate the black bar that goes across the Jimmy John's website about it's supposed to, whether it displays a location, whether it doesn't display a location. So the global header. So like here, and as I was telling you before, some of the things that I do before each test is like I make sure that there's no order in progress. So this before each here is it basically I go out and I find the start over link and I click on it. And once I've clicked on it, then I go find the user message. And if it's displayed, then I'm going to find the confirmation button and click yes on it to say yes, kill the order. And then the other thing that I do is if the person's logged in, I check to see if I've got a log out button, then I want to basically click it and log out. And then these are pretty much like should not display the name of a location when there's no order in progress. So I'm doing, and here is, you're asking about whether Protractor by CSS is what is the shorthand for using a CSS selector itself. So we're basically, I'm looking for an attribute called JJ address, and then I'm going to basically get the style and then make sure that it's truthy. In other words, it should be display none. If it was actually visible, then the style would be blank. It would basically would be unhidden. And there's several things here, like we're going to get the current location abbreviation, and we're going to make sure that it equals #991. So here's where I'm actually using the binding that we're using on the page from Angular, and then we're getting the text from it. And then you'll see here I use wait for Angular quite a bit here, because in this case here, when we call select location with a location ID, it actually goes out, starts a new order, and actually loads up the menu. So it takes a little while to go do that. So instead of automatically executing the next step, I'm like, okay, wait for Angular to complete and get us to a point where we're ready to move to the next one. So let me go ahead and bring this guy up, and what we're going to do here is let me bring my node again. But instead of Protractor, we're going to use spec. And the other thing I'm going to do before we get started is I'm going to go out here and I'm going to log into Sauce Labs so we can actually look at it. SAUCE. There we go. Okay, so you can, with your free account, you get 200 minutes, automation minutes per month, which you can do a lot of the test with. You also get like 30 minutes of actual manual sessions, and you can actually go in and you can say, I want to test something out on an iOS device, an Android device, Linux running Firefox, Mac OS. So I just want to have this up here so that we can actually play with it once I start this. So we'll go ahead and we'll kick it off. Oh, could not find Selenium. Oh, let me double check it. Where am I at? Did I break something? I will do it over from scratch. Okay. Okay, you can't find the module Selenium WebDriver. Actually, it's actually there, but I can do it again. Make sure it's actually installed, just in case. Okay, so now it's actually up and running. So if I come back over here and we refresh the page, you'll see I have an unnamed job that's queued here. And in a moment, okay, it's running. So let's go ahead and we're going to view it full screen, and we can actually watch it. He's going to actually load the live video for us, and we can actually watch it and run through the test here. It's a little bit slower because we're running Windows XP with Google Chrome. Matter of fact, so here's everything, and all I'm using is a normal Chrome, but maybe we died already. Let me double check. Yeah, timeout. Cannot call method get. I ran much better today, but it would actually run through the test. You can sit there and watch it. I don't want to keep you guys for always set through it. I'll try one more. So let me cancel the job and say yes. And then we'll come back out. I'll run one more. Actually, I've only run a couple on Sauce Labs, really. Most of the stuff I've been using is Newstar or .biz, and that's where we did a lot of our load testing from, and it's all Selenium WebDriver based as well. But really, sometimes I wonder if that's really the best thing to use for a load test. I'm sure there's better things, but
When I meant parallel, I didn't mean for loading. I meant, if every test you do is, doing booking for say patrons, and that each one takes 20 seconds, if you're doing several tests in series, and that can map to up to a few minutes,
right.
you can issue them in parallel to source labs. You can leave several browsers, and then, eventually
Yeah.
according to the longest test.
Yeah, no, I have not got to that on using it here. I know they show exactly how to do it in the Sauce Labs documentation, and you should be able to adapt that to this. I did do it with Newstar. We were running like 300 simultaneous users through random stuff, which was really cool to watch your server start to, all of a sudden bog down and then come back and bog down. But at the same time, it was like, it becomes really expensive because what you're doing is you're taking over a virtual machine for every user that you're running the browser in, and it can get a little bit expensive. But when you're talking about a site that's running 50, 60,000 orders through it in a 2-hour period, a couple $100 is nothing. Again, see, this one failed on me too. On my other account, we were able to make it run a little bit better. I'm sorry I don't have a good example for you, but it will actually bring it up. It will run it for you. It'll take you through it. And it, like I said, it will actually run on top of it'll take over. So Sauce Labs key, the Sauce user will actually run in priority of everything else. All right. Well, no, it's actually, that's the way that they coded it. So what it is it starts and it says, if you have a Sauce user and a Sauce key, that I'm going to go and I'm going to try to connect through the Selenium WebDriver and I'm going to talk to them. If you don't have that, then it's going to look for the Selenium WebDriver address. And if you don't have that, then he's going to look for the jar and then the port. And so what you should do is if you're going to have different configurations, comment everything out and then uncomment the stuff that you're going to use. So like if you're going to run it on your desktop, comment out unless you've got the Selenium server running as a service on your desktop, comment it out and then go to the next and use the standalone server. So I wanted to give you guys some resources. These two books here, Selenium 2 Testing Tools, a beginner's guide. It covers WebDriver in general and the Selenium IDE, but it is a good introduction. And he has a lot of different things to take you through all the different locators in that. So one thing to do is to get the book, read through it, and then go and use Protractor to rewrite it and run it in Protractor. Because they also show you how to deal with pop-ups and switching between windows and that. It also has really good instructions on setting up a Selenium grid and also how to set up your Android so that it can run the Selenium as well as iOS. The Selenium Testing Tools Cookbook is a really good just kind of cookbook of how do I go do multi-select select box. The only bad thing about the books is they're all written for WebDriver, which is the Java or Python or C# version of this. It isn't hard to translate that into WebDriver.js. It's just that you're gonna have to put like protractor.by in front of things, but it does work. The Protractor GitHub page, github.com/AngularProtractor. I was actually really surprised how little code is actually out there for Protractor to do a lot of this, to wrap the driver and everything. The WebDriver.js user guide, code.google.com/p Selenium wiki WebDriver.js. That's got a really detailed thing around the whole JavaScript and the asynchronous flow, and then Stack Overflow always has good stuff around Selenium, you know, when you're looking for something, if you're looking for an answer. You can also go to the Selenium, the Google groups out on Selenium as well. But that's pretty much it. I hope you guys learned something. Any questions or anything? All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now let's see if I can stop this guy. Let's